Namaskar, I am Dr. Nalini Avinash Wagmare, working as an associate professor at Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth. Today's our topic is related to Act of 1909. Then what were the reasons to introduce this Act? This Act also called as a Minto-Morley Reforms Act of 1909. What were the circumstances which lead to the Minto-Morley Reforms of 1909? Let's see one by one. The Indians were not satisfied with the reforms introduced by the Act of 1892. The Act had failed to satisfy even the moderates among the All India Congress. See, when we study the detailed history related to Indian national movement, the moderate extremists, revolutionaries, then Gandhian movement there. So in this time, in this period, we find that to please the moderate, the British had introduced this act. The rise of extremism within the Congress lead to further dissatisfaction with the reforms. As we know that extremists and moderate, that is the differences we find. So several factors contributed to the rise of extremism within the Congress and the terrorist movement outside it. The arrogant behavior of Lord Curzon and some of his administrative measures, like the Calcutta Corporation Act, the Calcutta University Act, measures to check bubonic plague, and the partisan of Bengal fueled the patriotism of the Indians. So the moderates always sided with the British government, faith in the British justice and belief in their administrative savings. But British is not ready to give independence. The so many reasons to start the extremism in India. Under that, they wanted to Swaraj, they wanted to self-government. So these are the differences between the moderate and extremism. This is the one more reason the Britishers wanted to take the favor of the moderates in their side. That's why they introduced this act. Then the defeat, one more reason is the defeat of Russia by Japan in 1904 raised the morale of the Asians, including the Indians in India and outside India, particularly in South Africa, also provided the provocation to the Indian nationalism. It resulted in the split of the All India Congress in 1907. The moderates on the day but failed to check the growing influence of the extremists within itself and outside. When we find that Japan defeated the Russia and Japan argued that Asia for the Asians, this is also one more impact that the Britishers wanted to control the India. That's why they introduced this act. Then other causes also, therefore, the British government felt the necessity of satisfying the Indian public opinion before it could be in favor of the extremists. The establishment of Muslim League in 1906 also gave the government chance to support Muslim communalism against the Indian nationalism. A new scheme of reforms could certainly be utilized to encourage Muslim communalism. So Britishers wanted to control the Muslim, control the moderates, and weaken the Indian nationalism. That's why now they are favor these two people, and that is the reason they are introducing this act and suppress the extremists, their policies, their principles, and their power. Thus, the necessity of further reforms arose to check the rise of extremism in Indian politics, win over the moderates in the Congress to the side of government, and weaponize Muslim communalism. So here the Britishers want to use the policy divide and rule policy. Therefore, a committee was appointed by the government of India to propose a scheme of reforms. If not control this time, the India easily get the freedom and they rule themselves and no need to take the help of the Britishers. And Britishers has to give up their powers. That's why now the Britishers think that it is better to introduce one constitutional act. The committee submitted its report, and when finally everything was settled between the Governor General and the Secretary of State, the Act of 1909 was passed by the British Parliament. That is why the Marlowe Minto two members are involved here. So that's why this act also called as a Marlowe Minto Reform Act. Then in detail we see the All India Congress demanded further reforms. The Indian government desired reforms within the view to satisfying the Indian liberals and extending its powers through the home government and the English traders desirous of sending their representatives in the Indian councils also desired reforms. The result was the Indian Council Act of 1892, by which the number of Central Legislative Council was fixed between the 10 to 20, 10 non-official, and the number of member of provisional councils between 8 to 20. The members of the councils continued to be nominated by the Governor General and the governors, but in any way, indirect election method was introduced by making a provision that these members would be nominated on the basis of recommendations made by certain organized associations and also by the non-official members of the provisional legislatures of the members of the center. The Indian Council Act of 1892, the members were permitted to discuss the annual budgets and ask questions from the executive councillors. The act was certainly a step ahead of the Act of 1861, which was introduced previously before 1892. And certain scholars have remarked that the foundation of the responsible government were really laid in 1892 and not in 1861. Yet the act failed to satisfy the Indian public opinion because the provisions of indirect elections served no purpose. The non-official members were in no opposition to influence the decision of the government, and the powers of the councils were very much limited. Then the Parliamentary Reforms Act 1909, the necessary of further reforms arose to check the rise of extremism in Indian politics, win over the moderates in Congress to the side of the government, and bitterness of Muslims. Hence, the act of was passed. Again, here the members legislative council was increased at the center. It was fixed 60 in Bengal, 50 in Madras and Mumbai, and the rest of the provisions it was 30. The members of the councils were to be 4 categories. That is, ex officio members, nominated official members, nominated non-official members, and elected members. Professional and communal representative system called the separate communal electoral system was introduced, this is the the divide and rule policies. That's why they mention the special concession given to the Muslim community here. Official majority was kept at the center, while in provinces the non-official majority, but including the non-official nominated members, was maintained. The members were permitted to suggest amendments in the budget and even to vote except in the case of non-votable items, initiate legislation and ask questions and supplementary questions from the member of the executive. So the Secretary of State for India was empowered to increase the number of executive councils of Madras and Mumbai from 2 to 4, and the Governor General could increase the number of councillors in the rest of the provinces with his permission. The Governor General was empowered to nominate 1 Indian member to his executive council. The act marked the climax of policy of association pursued by the English, and the All India Congress expressed its satisfaction over it in 1908. But the fact suffered from certain serious blows. That is, official majority was kept at the center. Non-official majority in the provinces was of no use when they put into practice. The voting disqualification were kept high. The rules of disqualification kept the extremists out of the councils. The powers of the councils were limited, and the worst of all was introduction of communal electors. So this is a demerit of the act. Then let's say the Indian Council Act failed. Again, the political leaders and political harmony was at stake due to the chaotic situation in India. The British authorized were compelled to undertake constitutional reforms with a view to secure the support of moderate leadership of the Indian National Congress. In this situation, the prominent moderate leader of the Indian National Congress the British wanted to take their favors. That's why they introduced in the earlier I told you. Then in this situation, prominent leaders were leader of the Indian Constitution like Mr. Gopal Krishna Gokhale went to England and met the Secretary of State for India, Lord John Morley, and submitted his views. Morley was sympathetic towards the urgency of the constitutional reforms in India. As the Lord John Morley and Lord Minto, who was the Viceroy of India, were in favor of introducing the constitutional reforms, a committee was constituted to inquire into the matter and submitted its report to the governors. In October 1906, the committee submitted its report to the Viceroy. After discussing the report in the Legislative Council, it was forwarded to the Secretary of State for India. The John Morley, after holding discussion and negotiation with the Viceroy of India, Lord Minto presented a bill to the British Parliament. So there was a process, system, and to pass the bill. So that time the British government, British Parliament passed the bill in 1909 to become an act. It is clear that the Indian Council Act 1909 was the result of joint endeavors of Lord John Morley, Secretary of State for India, and the Lord Minto, Viceroy of India. Therefore, the constitutional reforms introduced by the Indian Council Act 1909 are popularly called the Morley-Minto reforms. Then what was the chief objective of this introducing this act? To increase the area of function of legislative councils, to increase the size of the legislative councils, and to secure the support of the moderate section of the Indian National Congress. Then to secure the support of the moderate section of the Indian National Congress in their side, the act contains certain features which may be summed up in as follows. Actually, it's a detailed one, but in shortly, I have explained those things. Enlargement of size of the Legislative Council. The size of Legislative Council of the Governor General was raised from 16 to 60. The number of members of the Legislative Council of Governor General of Bengal, Madras, and Mumbai was raised from 15 to 50. Widening the functions of the legislative councils. Under the Indian Council Act 1982, the members of, 1892, the members of the Legislative Council were not authorized to vote on the annual financial settlements, and they could not divide the house on it. But under the Council Act of 1919, the members of Legislative Council could discuss the annual financial settlements and could divide the house on it. At least they have authority to discuss about the financial things. They were also authorized to propose the resolution on it. But the members of legislative councils were not allowed to put their points in the matters related to military works, customs, defense, and interest on public debt. Then introduction of the system of election of non-official members. The system of election for the appointment of non-official members of Legislative Council was introduced. There were two types of non-official members of the Legislative Council were elected non-official members and nominated non-official member. There were following three categories of electorates: special electorates, general electorates, and communal electorates. Then the another feature of this act is the provision for separate representation. Under the act, Muslims were given separate representation. In addition to this provision, landlords and professional classes were given the special representation in the legislative councils. Separate qualification provided for the Muslim electorates and also for the constitutes of the landholders, but females, minors, and persons of unsound mind were not regarded as qualified electorates. Only they have given the Muslim community electorate powers, neglected the minors and women. Then provision for appointment of vice presidents, the governor general, governors of presidency towns, and lieutenant governors having executive councils were authorized to appoint vice presidents. The vice presidents were empowered to preside over the meeting in the absence of their respective supervisors. Then another feature of this act is the appointment of Indians in executive councils. The number of the members of the executive councils of Madras and Mumbai were increased from 2 to 4. Indians were made eligible for the appointment of executive councils. The Governor General was authorized to constitute the executive councils for Lieutenant Governor provinces and also for Bengal by issuing notification under his signature and seal. Then what were the we have saw the which what were provisions of the act? Then why this act have some demerits also? Defects of the Indian Council Act 1909. Undoubtedly, the Indian Council Act had certain merits, but the enactment invited criticism as it had some defects. Their defects may be some as follows. Introduction of separate communal electorates. The creation of separate electorates for the Muslims was highly criticized by Indian National Congress and as it was against the democratic spirit. The Congress was also against the system of special representation of these landholders in the legislative councils. Means they have given the special powers to the Muslim community because before that Muslims, Hindus, other people united and fight against the Britishers. So Britishers want divide and rule policy adopted and they favor the Muslims. Later on, this became a very hurdles to Indians to get the freedom. No majority of non-official members. There was no majority of non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils. Here were two types of non-official members, elected non-official members and nominated non-official members. Practically, nominated non-official members stood with the official members and elected non-official members were in minority as against the official members. The system of nomination was retained. Then absence of responsible executive. The Act of 1909 failed to provide responsible executive councils. The substantial powers remained with the executive and the legislatures had no control over it. However, the legislatures could criticize the action of the executive. So the parliamentary system was retained, but there was no division of powers. The real power remained with the executive. Thus, the principle of autocracy remained. Only in the name they have said that parliamentary system was introduced, but in the practice it was absent there. Then Dr. Zahasari's rightly remark on these defects. The elective principle of democracy was adopted yet. At the same time, the anti-democratic communal representation was added. The official majority was done away with, but the elected members remained in minority. The membership was considerably enlarged, but an emphatic disclaimer was issued simultaneously that the Council of India and even the Viceroy's Executive Council were open to some very few and very selected Indians. As summing up this act, in spite of some defects therein, the Indian Council Act 1909 had certain merits too, which may be summed up as under. The function and size of the central and provincial legislative councils were increased. The members of the legislative councils could discuss and propose resolution on annual budget. The members of legislative councils were authorized to ask supplementary questions. There was extension of system of election in the legislative councils. The Act provided the majority of non-official members in the provincial legislative councils. So these are the reference book you can refer for more detail. So here only summarize introducing of Act of 1909, its merits, demerits, summary, and reference books. Thank you very much.